up to this point in Xtreme Articulation, we've dealt only with the volume hand and the volume loop. Now, let's talk about the pitch hand and the pitch rod. On a very fundamental level, anytime you change pitch, that change in pitch represents a very basic form of articulating a different note. And yet there's one other technique that I've been working with for years that can actually enable you to get a clean articulation of a note just by using the pitch hand, but it also has a number of optional effects. And the actual technique is very simple. It looks like this. I'll show it to you from the side. Sort of like a puppet mouth, opening and closing. Depending upon how I use it, I may make it look like this, or I may do a more stationary thumb, to the extent that sometimes the thumb barely even moves at all. There we go. But it's more a question of trying it and seeing what works for you. So the basic move is something that resembles what we did in the fundamentals when we were experimenting with what your hand could do with intervals. You hear how it's articulating the notes. And you can do it at different intervals. Start experimenting with this. Listen, just a step in the note, just from one note to another. A third. A fourth. You can use this technique to work with intervals in very creative ways. The first way is a trill. And you know a trill is going from one note to another very, very fast. You do it in classical music a lot. Jazz artists use trills. And more often than not, when I see a thereminist execute a trill, it's like this. It's a rather inexact sort of a move. Try this. I think it works much better. You can incorporate it into a lot of different types of playing. You see what I mean? So that's the first thing you can do with this type of articulation in a trill. And you can trill, as you just saw, in different intervals. In thirds, in fourths, in fifths, and sometimes even in an octave. Either way, trill is the first thing. Another thing that you can use this for is a really good way to add some articulation as you descend from a high pitch to a low pitch. And all you do is the same move. This time the thumb, it'll look like I'm moving it a lot, but it's actually a little bit more stationary. And I'm using my thumb as a placeholder so that I return back to the same note. Listen to a descent without it. Now a descent with it. You're actually Did you hear that as I open my fingers, the pitch goes slightly up, just slightly sharp. But if you do it rapidly enough and place it well enough in the song, it's almost imperceptible. Finally, a way of using this is to combine a trill and a descent or an ascending rise in pitches to be able to use a trill for another effect, and that involves your volume hand too. A trill, just descending, sounds like this. Now, if I want to stop on various notes to emphasize them, I can. However, if I use a little bit more articulation just before the note I want to hit, I can actually make it even cleaner. You can use effects like that for experimental music, soundscapes, creative noise. Work with these motions and see what you can do. It's a way of articulating on its own or combining it with the volume hand. Either way, it's another bunch of options for extreme articulation.